May God's peace be with you today, and may we all be open to how God's Word today will change and grow us. It's Father's Day. I want to wish again a happy Father's Day to all the fathers that are listening, and I thought on this Father's Day I'd preach a sermon from one of my favorite places in the world, my back patio. Although when the guy who redid this did it, he called it an outdoor living space, which I guess is the snooty way of saying back patio. But of course we're here in my neighborhood, and who knows what kinds of sounds we'll hear during this sermon, so we'll just keep rolling on if we hear those sounds. And who knows, it might be a spontaneous game of cornhole that'll break out between the fathers in the neighborhood. We've been playing cornhole recently, and there's a couple fathers in this neighborhood, Chad and Jake, I haven't been able to beat in cornhole. Maybe someday. But again, I have a lot of respect for the fathers that are in my neighborhood and in our church, and we honor you today. So as we think about 2020, what is the word that you would use to describe this year so far? Now, there could be many answers to that, but one word that comes to mind from what I've experienced and what I hear from other people is the word overwhelmed. How would you rate your feeling overwhelmed quotient, let's say since March? Is it more or is it less? Many were already feeling overwhelmed before, but now when that pandemic hit, they're feeling even more overwhelmed because of the changes that have been brought on by the pandemic. And then piling on top of that, in the last few weeks, the civil unrest brought about by the killing of George Floyd, and having to more honestly face the racism that is in our culture. So here's what I'm hearing. The pandemic and being compelled to face our racism has changed things for people. For myself. Now, for some, it's simply meaning that we feel more overwhelmed than we did before. I know that's how I feel sometimes. But also for others, what has happened in the last number of months has shed light on some things in their lives they want to see changed, and some changes they want to make. What about you? Are there changes that have been brought on by this pandemic and having to more honestly face our racism that you want to make these changes moving forward as we move into the new normal? Well, we read some words from Jesus today that may help guide us in the changes we want to make. From Matthew chapter 11, we read that Jesus said this, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." When you take that weary and burdened together, that sounds like being overwhelmed, right? So Jesus said, when you come to me when you are overwhelmed, I will give you rest. And the rest that Jesus is talking about here is not just, getting more sleep time or being able to take some more naps. It's a rest for your souls, a term he'll use in the next verse. A deep down inside abiding rest, what I might call a restful lifestyle, such that when things hit you in life, you won't be so overwhelmed. So you say, how? How is it that happens, how we experience it? Well, Jesus answers it when he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." So a yoke is, as we know, a structure that is put on beasts of burden to yoke them together so that the work can be more easily done. Here is a little miniature version of a yoke that I received years ago, and I'll tell you about that in a bit. So Jesus is saying, take up my yoke. But he says to take up my yoke means to learn something. Well, what is it that we have to learn? And why should we take up the yoke of Jesus and learn from him? Jesus answers the why when he goes on to say, "For I am gentle and humble in heart." As Jesus guides us, inspires us to make these changes in our life, to be more like Jesus, he's going to do that with a gentle hand. He's not going to come down upon us in a condemning way when we don't go along so rapidly in making these changes, or so well in making these changes. He's going to be gentle with us, and he's humble in heart. I mean, he's going to take on the form of a servant, as he says, humbling himself to take on the form of a servant, and he's going to lead us to make these changes as a servant. He's not going to put us down or condemn us or come down hard on us because we may be struggling to make these changes to be more like Jesus. Jesus further goes on to say why it is that we should take up his yoke and learn from him when he says, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, it's a yoke, a structure that is used to get work done, that to share the burden. It's a yoke, but the yoke of Jesus, when we take on and learn from it, we're going to experience it as being easy. The word actually could be translated kindly. It's going to be a kindly yoke. It's a burden, but we're going to feel it as being light when we take on the yoke from Jesus and learn from him. So what is this yoke of Jesus that we are to learn? How would you describe the yoke of Jesus to someone? Now, there are many answers to the question how to describe the yoke of Jesus, but here's one I want to invite us to try on today, and it comes from the illustration Jesus himself used in this passage of a yoke. A yoke, again, is a structure put in place to more easily get work done as a team. And if you carry away anything today from today's sermon, it is this: the yoke of Jesus is a gentle structure that gives you a restful and balanced lifestyle. The yoke of Jesus is a gentle structure that gives you a restful and balanced lifestyle. Finding true rest and taking up the yoke of Jesus does not mean becoming lazy. It is, after all, a yoke, and it is a burden that he says. But rather, Jesus promises that following his way of living will bring a yoke that is easy and a burden that is light. You won't so often feel overwhelmed. So here's this little miniature yoke that I have, and I've had this for many years. I received this when I was in college working at Lutheran Memorial Camp, and it was kind of the symbol for our staff during that summer, because the understanding here is that when we are yoked, when we take on the yoke of Jesus, we are yoked to Jesus. That he is the one with us as we are carrying this burden together, like two yoke of oxen together. We're carrying and moving that burden forward together as a team. And the deal is, when you have two animals yoked together, or when we're yoked together with Jesus, you can't one of them can't try to go faster than the other. And I think there's a message there for us. When we are yoked to Jesus, he's going to help to pace us because he's gentle and humble in heart. He's going to help to pace us. And if we try to go too fast, if we try to go farther than he's has us ready to go, or if we try to go through a door that he hasn't yet opened, it's just not going to work. And we're going to feel overwhelmed. But if we wait for Jesus to open the doors for us before we try to go through them, when we try to go at the pace that Jesus has for us in changing our lives and growing to be more like Jesus, that's what it means to be yoked to Jesus. And he's going to be with us in that and empowering us in that through the work of the Holy Spirit. You know, I once heard a person, as they described this verse that we're looking at today, and they said to Jesus, you know, I know you say your yoke is easy and your burden is light, but following you sometimes, Lord, the yoke that I have seems to be, hard and heavy. And then he heard Jesus say back to him in his spirit, like, well, I don't know whose yoke you're carrying, but that's not my yoke, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. To experience The easy and light yoke of Jesus, you may have to take off or let go of some of the unnecessary, hard, and heavy yoke that you are trying to carry in your life by yourself. Can you identify something like that in your life? Because the yoke of Jesus is a gentle structure that gives you a restful and balanced lifestyle. I want to give us a way of understanding this yoke of Jesus that is a gentle structure that gives you a restful and balanced lifestyle. And this comes from a book that I read many years ago called Workplan and Worship by Gordon Dahl. He says that our lives maybe can be divided into three areas: work, play, and worship. Our job, inside or outside the home, what we do with our free time when we're not sleeping, and when we are in worship together with other followers of Jesus. Now, there are two traps we want to avoid in thinking about these three areas of our lives. We neither want to unnecessarily divide them or confuse them. Because when we try to unnecessarily divide them or confuse them, it can lead to feeling overwhelmed. So, for example, in the first trap, when we try to divide them and keep them well separated from one another, called compartmentalization of our lives, maybe even to the extreme where we're keeping them far apart. We want to keep one area and not have it in any way mingle with the other area of our life. Now, the problem with that is we're trying to serve all three areas in a balanced way, and we're often are saying, I'm not giving enough to this area of my life, or I'm giving too much to this area of my life, because we're trying to keep them so separated. What we want to do is we want to see them more blended together in a more holistic, restful, balanced lifestyle, that they are more connected. So when it comes to our work, can we see it more as a calling or a vocation from God? In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31, it says, whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. Can you find value in your work? Are you working at something that you enjoy? One of the best pieces of advice that my father gave me is to find work that I enjoy, because we're going to be doing it a lot of hours during each week of our lives. And if that's not the case for you, what change can you make with your work to move towards that? Maybe it means changing jobs or finding a different career. Maybe it means seeing your work as a means to an end, so that you have the resources to do the other areas of mission in your life. Maybe it means seeing your workplace and the people you're with as a mission for you, to serve them and to serve others for the sake of God, and to be a witness. When it comes to our play, do we have times where we can really play and be filled up with that enjoyment, hobbies and pastimes, to do with friends? Are we giving that enough time in our lives and seeing that as part of what it means to live a balanced and restful life? And worship. Certainly it means being together for corporate worship, but here's what the Apostle Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, verse 1. In view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. That worship just isn't what we do on Sunday mornings when we gather for worship, but our whole life of living to please Jesus every day, of serving others as Jesus has served us, loving others as Jesus has loved us, to be obedient to his commands, is our whole act of worship. So we want to avoid dividing them up and see them more together in a lifestyle, the yoke of Jesus, that is a gentle structure that gives us a restful and balanced lifestyle. Now, here's the second trap we want to avoid in understanding how the yoke of Jesus is a gentle structure that gives us a restful and balanced lifestyle, and that is to overly confuse or conflate work, play, and worship in our lives, because they each have their own role. One, I don't think this is realistic. I don't think this could ever seriously happen. But when we try to blend them all together and as though they don't have their own unique area and benefit in our life, we can fall into these kinds of traps. We can begin to worship our work. Many of you know what that is, that we're tempted to do that, to put work on the throne of our lives. We can begin to work at our play. You know, the weekend comes and we're so intent on playing that we wear ourselves out through the weekend, or on vacation. We come back exhausted because we've been working so hard at our play. And we can also fall in the trap of playing at our worship. The only time we get a little rest is when we go to church and we take a nap during the sermon. I once had a guy in our congregation jokingly say that he didn't want my sermons to be any shorter because he barely got enough time to take a nap as it was. So we want to neither divide nor confuse these areas of our lives, but rather to see them blended together as a whole and unified lifestyle that gives us rest and balance. Understand that each has its proper and distinct place and experience in our life. Now, that doesn't mean that I think we shouldn't work to bring them somewhat more together, to kind of increase this middle space in our lives. Will probably never completely come together, maybe nor should they. But a restful lifestyle is experienced when we enjoy our work, play, and worship all together. So here's the next step from today. Identify which one of these areas in your life is out of balance. Identify a way that you could maybe bring it more into balance with the other areas of your life, so as you can not feel so overwhelmed and you can experience that yoke of Jesus that is easy and the burden is light, that gentle structure that Jesus gives us, where we will have a restful and balanced life. I hope this is helpful to you and helps you to determine what changes you want to make in your life so you'll feel less overwhelmed and live in this new normal that we'll be experiencing. May God be with you today.